This is the second video for 9-mark questions in OCR GCSE Business Studies, but this video is particularly looking at Paper 2. Now, the Paper 2 9-mark question is based on the Section 7, the independent nature of business. I've included the specification content on the slide, and basically it's considering how topics from different units link, influence, and should be considered within business decisions. So it's a synoptic question which may include any topic from Paper 1, as well as the content from Paper 2, including Unit 4, 5 and 6. So if you consider the 4 bullet points and the specific wordings, for example, operations, finance, marketing and HR linked together as one. However, the next question is how one of them could affect business decisions. The other is risk and reward of these units, but just on Unit 1, business activity content. And finally, financial information on any form of decision. So any type of business decision, it could be, for example, maybe they're changing location, maybe they're thinking about growth, whatever it might be. Now, the mark scheme is pretty much exactly the same. You've got 2 marks for knowledge and understanding, 2 marks for application. But application also comes into consideration with evaluation, which I'll look at in a second. 2 marks for analysis, and that judgment of 3 marks. Now, to get the 3 marks for the judgment, it has to be applied. So technically, application is needed throughout. So AO1, my advice would be start off with a definition, showing understanding of the concepts being assessed. The concepts will differ from more than one different unit. So it's really important to show the examiner your understanding of the whole specification of OCR GCSE Business Studies. So these examples, we have ethics from Unit 6. We have workers' motivation and retention from Unit 3. We have globalisation from Unit 6, but shareholders and PLCs from Unit 1. We have consumer income levels from Unit 6, but marketing from Unit 2. So an example of how you could start the answer off. I've defined ethics, motivation and retention. So ethics, the moral guidelines which governs good behaviour within companies' decision making. Motivation, based on the employee's willingness and ability to work to the best of their ability. And retention of staff, M&S's ability to keep hold of their current staff. Globalisation, shareholders as well as PLCs are the key concepts in this question. So, and what was actually quite interesting, the examiner's reports did say that globalisation was defined in an inaccurate sense, just looking at imports and exports, and that is it. So I've put it as globalisation refers to businesses acting on a global scale, making the world more interconnected. Shareholders legally own a percentage of a company's stock, and AMPLC is a public limited company and therefore float their shares on the stock market. Now, the rest of your answer should also show that knowledge and understanding, but just starting off with a definition might just help. So in terms of AO2, again, with all questions prior, you have to use the case study. And the question doesn't necessarily request you to use the data unless it's based on financial information. But sometimes you'll be given the data, and if the data is relevant, then of course it should be used. If the data isn't relevant to the 9-mark question, then you can't use it. And if it's not relevant to the 9-mark question, it's probably relevant to another question which has already been asked prior to this question. So as I've said before, if there's a possibility of financial data being given, and the question is on that financial data, in terms of business performance and decision making, then it must be used. AO3A is your ability to analyse, but the key here is you're building a chain of analysis which has to revolve around more than one business concept. So it can be from any unit in the spec, so your subject knowledge has to be complete. And my advice would be start off just ensuring that your knowledge of the key terms is 100%, and then you can build on from that. So even though Paper 2 only assesses Unit 4, 5 and 6, the last question can bring in Unit 1, 2 and 3 as well. Your analysis should be developed, and if the examiner can ask the question why at any point, then that suggests your argument is incomplete. So just make sure the examiner cannot ask that famous question of, well, why is that the case? And just make sure your reasoning is full. Right, AO3B, make a clear decision. Apply it to the given case study and ensure it's weighted. So weighted justification. So in other words, what I mean by that is, why is this point more important than my other point? You don't want to be repeating what you've previously said, but you want to be placing weight on what you've previously said. So before, you've not compared or contrasted your points. Now, you are going to. So Again, just based on this question that I'm going to look at first, what I've done is I've looked at the case study and I've picked out some information from the case study, which I think could be key. So what we've got is, for example, Plan A. We've got that they're a leading retailer, what they actually do in Plan A. And I thought that actually it tells you the ethical strategies, but also they're a leading retailer, so they're probably under greater media scrutiny. So I've made a model answer. The font is large and that's why it's going over 2 PowerPoint slides, but really it's just 4 paragraphs in total. 1 small paragraph on AO1, 2 paragraphs for a balanced analytical argument for AO2 and AO3A, and the final paragraph being the judgment. So feel free to pause the video to read, but as you'll see, my very first introductory paragraph just gets me the AO1, A and B, and then in each analytical paragraph, I'm targeting consistency. So what I mean by that is I'm making sure that I'm thinking about the context and the application of M&S in both paragraphs, and I develop both analytical arguments. So again, feel free to pause. And again, feel free to pause because this is the second part of the answer. But again, in that top paragraph, which is my counter argument, I've got my AO2 and my AO3A again. And then I've got my judgment. So to evaluate, I believe ethics will be positive for motivation and staff retention. So I'm given a decision. And I'll get 1 mark just for that decision. But then I've gone on to justify why, and I've applied it to the situation. So in terms of what the examiner said in the examiner's report, they did mention that those students who did start their answer off with a definition, if the definition was accurate, they actually went on to achieve higher marks. And I mean, straight away, it's guaranteeing you the 2 AO1 marks. So that'll make sure that you get those. But it also, I think, just helps with the structure of the answer. It just gets you into that structure of routine where I start from my definition, then I do my analytical arguments, then I go into my judgment. And I think it just helps with that flow. So the next question that we're looking at is Aston Martin. And again, we've got these questions. Evaluate how globalization may bring risk and reward to the shareholders of Aston Martin PLC. So I've looked at the case study again. I feel personally that the first paragraph is absolutely key for this in terms of how they operate globally. So they've got a globalized supply chain. They operate in over 50 countries and have 150 car dealerships. Now, I'm not saying you need to use all of that, but I think that first paragraph is essential on globalization. So again, feel free to pause. And what you've got, opening paragraph, the definitions. My first paragraph, just developing as to why globalization could be beneficial. Then I've got my second counter argument as to why it might not be. But what you'll probably notice here is I felt the analysis was quite simple, but the judgment was more challenging with regards to that justification. So you'll see that my judgment it's got greater weight and depth than maybe my analysis. So as it says here, in judgment to the question, I believe globalization is a positive for Aston Martin with more rewards than risks. So I've applied it to the case study, but they've got a prestigious reputation with a luxury design, which should mean they withstand the competition, but the increasing customer base therefore makes it worth it. And I have to relate back to what the question is asking about the shareholders of Aston Martin. So the more profitability they experience, the higher their share price will be, and that's that wealth for the shareholders. Furthermore, recent product development suggests that by having a global brand image, it's helped organic growth and reduce the risk of moving into such markets, which should continue to strengthen the potential for dividends in the future. So I've made sure my evaluation always links back to those concepts that are being assessed, such as shareholders and globalization. Now, the examiner's reports, they did say that there was a misconception regarding what globalization was. Too many opening definitions just looked at imports and exports, but it's all to do with this idea of operating on that global scale, whether that's getting suppliers, whether that's maybe e-commerce, which is international, maybe setting up in international locations such as offshoring, maybe it's outsourcing. There's more to it than just importing and exporting. Right, so what I've done is I've come up with some potential questions, or possible questions, sorry, I should say, to the style of questions which might come up and which you might get. Now, I'm not predicting, I'm not speculating what might come up. These are just simply practice revision questions. I've not included a business or a case study, so again, you'd have to think about AO2, but it might just get you revising how you can maybe link the units and the topics together. So we've got evaluate the financial performance of the company and how it might impact their growth decisions. So what financial performance information you might get, it might be based on profitability, it might be based on cash flow, anything, for example, from that Unit 5. Then we've got evaluate how environmental pressure on the business may have an impact on operational activities. Now, I've left some of these questions quite vague and quite open. Now, the questions might be, in terms of the paper, be very, very similar to this, or they might be a little bit more specific on a specific type of operational activity. So it could be, again, their choice of production process. It could be to do with, in terms of maybe their locations. You could delve into it however you like by looking at the spec. Another one, evaluate how unemployment levels might impact marketing activities of the firm. So that one is based on Unit 6 and Unit 2. Then we've got evaluate how the operational decisions of the company will bring risks and rewards for their stakeholders. We've got evaluate how the economic climate may have an impact on the business's marketing decisions. And we've got to evaluate how their operational decisions might impact human resource management decisions for the firm. And these are just, again, just possible revision questions that you could look into in preparation for this 9 marker.